Hi everyone, thank you for having me today. As we were asked, I will quick start with a presentation of myself and then share with you this ongoing research that I entitled The Bass Tube and the Dragon Sauce, an investigation on Parisian domestic water. So, I am an architect, but I also have a background in anthropology with a focus in what we call science and technology studies, which is basically means how you can understand society and cultural situation through techniques. As a practitioner, architect, I am interested in the built form and its design, especially domestic space and collective housing. As an anthropologist apprentice, I am also interested in domestic space, but as a socio-technical assembly, trying to understand how this infrastructure and techniques have an influence on the construction of space itself and also on our habits. As Susan Langstar used to say, infrastructure studies might be quite boring and unexciting, but I will do my best to make this presentation at least not too boring. Bathroom, as the specific rooms in housing, emerged in European cities in the 19th century, mainly because of the growing need for the ruling classes to establish a moral order and hygienist values among the working classes. This evolution led both to the transformation of domestic space and the notion of intimacy as we know it today. The possibility of running water in every building and at every floor has required massive infrastructural works as well as the establishment of norms, regulation, and policies. These works have produced and still continue to produce externalities, territorial inequalities, domestic spatial organization, and social attitudes that shape everyday life. This ongoing research is based on an ethnographic fieldwork conducted over the past 6 months, focusing on the invisible actors of domestic water infrastructure in Paris. It is also an attempt to define investigation as a tool of research, a specific way of looking, engaging our own body, and using mixed media resources. This presentation has been designed as a visual journey from my bath tube to the water source and from the source back to Paris to better understand what lies behind this uninterrupted flow of waters. As often in science and technology studies, it all started with a breakdown, because breakdown help us to better understand complex infrastructure that usually work in the background, almost invisible. In my case, the breakdown was a very domestic one. It was a leak, a very small one, but still a very disturbing one. Under the sink, I wonder where the water in my apartment comes from. I tracked pipes in the stairwell, but quickly lost their trail. In the street, I look at the floor. Here and there, abstract and colored traces. They intersect, connect, stop, then reappear a little further on. Each color has its own meaning: red for electricity, yellow for gas, blue for drinking water, purple for heating, and so on. These colorful traces reveal the past of Parisian underground networks. They signal an upcoming change, telling the story of the intervening of time. As I wander, I can piece together an ephemeral and incomplete puzzle of Parisian water infrastructure. Quick investigation tell me that in Paris, water is distributed by a public operator responsible for its production and distribution in the capital. Without going into details, where I live, the water comes from the eastern Paris area, mostly from the Voulzy aqueduct. It traveled more than 100 kilometers before flowing into my sink or bath tube. I think back to Anaïk France and François Maspero and their journey along a train line, or to Dunlop and Cortázar traveling along the highway connecting Paris to Marseille. There must be a continuous line, a passable line that leads from the sources to my bathroom and that I will be able to follow. At the archives, I found another image of Paris and its surroundings, a map from 1854 made by Eugène Belgrand, the engineer in charge of building the aqueduct that a few years later would supply Paris with clean and drinkable water. The map shows an initial sketch for the water road. If you look closely, you can see the absence of any inhabited areas, with the exception of places of power, Paris, Versailles, and Saint-Germain-en-Laye. However, a comparison with a map from the same period shows numerous inhabited areas along the planned routes. This map is what Nicolas Mirzoeff calls commander's visualization, that allow one to control a territory from a distance, to project both its transformation and its management. By extension, we could mention Tim Ingold on what he wrote about transport lines, on which also applies to aqueduct. He describes them as straight and regular and drawn across fields. Above all, he emphasizes the way in which they divide and cut up the occupied surface of the territory. In our case, Eugène Belgrand's maps were translated into decrees, giving the authorities the power to expropriate those who found themselves on the straight line of the Eastern Paris water supply network. Maps, expropriations, straight lines, decrees of national interest, it shouldn't be that difficult to find the road of the water. However, the various documents available here and there never allow for a precise location of the water source, the water route. By isolating the visible elements like aqueducts, bridge, and technical buildings on Google Earth, I realized that they are all connected by long meadows, always green. Click after click, point after point, a line emerges that leads from the sources to the gate of Paris. The water road is a long meadows, 12 meters wide and about 100 kilometers long. A few months ago, I finally went to look for the water source and found it, hidden behind a dense vegetation. Water source as a symbolic artifact has an ambiguous past, especially when talking about painting and poetry. As Élisée Reclus reminds us, water and its sources has always been a symbol for moral purity because its clearness and transparency. But more than that, the water source has long been associated with, in both painting and poetry, with the female gender. In Water and Dreams, Gaston Bachelard associates water with femininity, motherhood, or passivity. As he points out, romantic and symbolic poetry, women are often represented as fountains, water sources, mirror, or river of tendresses. This depiction is both archetypal and cultural. It is an essentialist attitude that he doesn't seem to question, on which, of course, is problematic. But reading Bachelard helps us at least to understand this association between the source, the female body, and the question of purity. This is also something that we can see in painting. The source has always been a subject for painters, always associated with the female body. Ivan Illich describes the sources painted by Courbet, I quote, as a supremely feminine woman, completely at ease with her nudity and the affirmation of her flesh, end quote. Which is quite the same for the source by Ingres from 1856, and about which Élisée Reclus says it's so graceful to behold, on which he almost sculpted with his brush. But this relationship between water and female body has evolved from a natural environment to a domestic and intimate environment. One has to go to visit the Musée d'Orsay and observe the background of the Ingres, Courbet, Degas, or Bompard's painting. Natural background, where female bodies are depicted among trees and streams, have been replaced by domestic interiors, tubs, and baths. This domestication of territories comes along with the domestication of bodies. This symbolic dimension of the water source that has been associated with the notion of purity can also be found in the infrastructure itself. Let's come back to our source. In the 1918th and the 19th century, there was a long-standing controversy between pure water and filtrated water. At this time, Paris was facing huge water sanitation issues, especially because of domestic water was most often taken from the dirty banks of the Seine. On one side, there was those who advocate purifying water through filtration processes. On the other, those who insist that one must find pure water and then transport it carefully in order to preserve its quality. The major public work carried out by Haussmann and Angèle Belgrand would in the 19th ultimately vindicate the defenders of pure water. Since then, the history of water in Paris has been a constant flight forward. As the capital grew, water has sourced from ever more distant locations. Politics determines science, say Stephen Chapin and Simon Schaffer. In Paris, politics determines infrastructure. And although today water filtration from the Seine exists, Paris' major water infrastructure remains linked to water sources. As I said previously, part of my waters comes from the sources of Provins, mainly the Dragon sources and the Voulzay sources, irrigated by the Voulzay aqueduct. But here's the paradox of this infrastructure. All the sources connecting to the Voulzay aqueduct are equipped with a supply and return network. The supply network carries the water to Paris. The return network conveys water from the Seine back to the very location of the source. This is what is called and known as a restitution obligation. Put it in another way, the entire volume of water withdrawn is fully returned in real time. For each water source, gallery, or distribution chamber, there is two distinct rooms and two different atmospheres. The room through which the water source flows is tiled and cleaned. By contrast, the room reserved to the arrival of Seine water is discharged, present an entirely different spectacle. Here there are no tiles or white walls, but rather dirty, damp concrete. The water source on its own doesn't exist anymore. On one hand, the water source is trapped in a pipe, domesticated and privatized by the city of Paris. On the other hand, the river that should spring from the waters of the source is irrigated by the water from the Seine. This terraformation through infrastructure has long been discussed at the Assembly and in the public debates of the beginning of the 20th century. A deputy of the department asked, why Paris, I quote, why Paris robbed them, why the water of the Seine should not be good enough for Parisians and good for them. A journalist wrote, I quote, one will no longer know whether it is a Voulzay flowing into the Seine or the Seine into the Voulzay. These hydrological perversities have overstimulated the engineers' imagination. They have lost their heads, end quote. Everything in the room and in the artifacts reflects the difference, both concrete and symbolic, between these two waters. Paris is the force that terraforms the surrounding territories. It plays at communicating vessels with streams and rivers, unrolling a long green carpet through forests, terrain, and fields. The first to be forgotten by Parisian water are these territories and their inhabitants. Along the aqueduct, I met local residents, talked with farmers and ranchers, and followed the work of the Voulzay maintenance team who repair and maintain the Voulzay aqueduct. I watched them operating the water retention devices, using modern and traditional techniques to manage these long plots of land stretching from Provins to Paris. A wetland in the middle of a meadow or grass that is greener than usual are all natural indicators for operators. Along the aqueduct, there are no sensors or cameras to detect leaks, only the knowledge of a field surveyed on a daily basis and the sensitive expertise of operators can do so. To repair a century-old network, they use lead mesh and kind of hammers, to a far cry from the modern image promoted by the city of Paris. These operators act day after day to take care of the Parisian domestic water, reminding us the invisible work necessary for this infrastructure to function. As feminist scholar Ara Wilson reminds us, infrastructure and intimacy share a common feature. Their aim is to remain invisible, thereby rendering the work required to maintain them invisible as well. By following the aqueduct to Paris, it seems to me that the supply of domestic water to Paris is above all a matter of neighborliness and good relations. From the relation between Paris and the distant communities, it passes through to the more or less tacit agreements that made with farmers and ranchers to minor dispute over the pruning of a tree. Paris and its public company are first and foremost neighbors. But there are powerful neighbors who, like any large landowner, grant or deny access to plots of land at will and exercise their right to oversee what is done in the vicinity. Last but not least, I would like to mention two other fieldworks part of this research. Both aim to understand what domestic water and its social and normative construction does to people that doesn't fit normative conduct or normative bodies. At Bichat Hospital in the north of Paris, I spent some time with the service of follow-up care and rehabilitation and its team and patients. This service consists of assessing motor, sensory, cognitive, and psychological abilities. In practice, it aims to relearn everyday movement and adjust them when necessary. It's a world within the hospital world, a facsimile of the domestic space, with its everyday object, trinkets, and clutter. From sessions with patients, I remember how everything in our intimate relation with water is governed by convention and norms. The height of a sink, how a faucet works, access to a shower, the width of a door. What their bodies have forgotten, they must reinvent through courage and strength. Otherwise, they risk losing this intimacy and having to accept outside help. There are the forgotten bodies and the forgotten intimacies. For several weeks now, I have been washing in the public bath in my neighborhood. Every morning, I cross the street, walk a few meters, and enter these public facilities. Public baths in Paris originated in the 19th century as part of the same hygiene movement that reformed cities and domestic spaces. Even today, they are accessible to all and free of charges. The place reminds us the predominance of hygiene issues. It also reminds us of the possibility of a place for socializing and exchange. Privacy is precarious here, but it reveals in the exchanges between users and staff other way of thinking about intimacy, water, and care. To conclude, water guides us from a situation to another, from an object to another, from an encounter to another. It makes us see those forgotten people on whom Paris water supply depends. It makes visible to forgotten people who had to be sacrificed to that the water could flow day after day. It directs us toward those forgotten people whose bodies or structural or social status do not allow for the intimacy that we have taken for granted and consider immutable. From the aqueduct to the bathtub, there is the same fragility of gestures, the fragility of infrastructure, the fragility of bodies that we must constantly watch over. And finally, I would like to quote Nicolas Nova, because here it's difficult not to mention here, and because his work on the way he was conducting his investigation were and still are a great source of inspiration. And I will read it in French because it's easier. S'il est effectivement nécessaire de se rendre disponible à la marche du monde, l'important est surtout de savoir diriger ses sens, de faire varier les points de vue ou les dimensions de la situation considérée et d'apprendre à repérer des détails avec précision. En d'autres termes, d'acquérir des stratégies et des tactiques. Thank you very much.